All right, and to discuss this further, we're now joined via Zoom by Mr. Ben Theron, who's the director at the Whistleblower House. Mr. Theron, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. First of all, tell us more about Whistleblower House. What necessitated such a body?
Whistleblower House was started specifically because there was a lack of support, lack of security, and dangers to whistleblowers. So that's why the Whistleblower House was started in July 2021, and we opened our doors on 22nd of February 2022. And we did that specifically to address the gap that was in the state mechanisms.
All right. Now, first, look, let's get your reaction now that Justice Minister Ronald Damuda has made recommendations for whistleblower protection open for public comment. What do you think about all this?
Long overdue, but we are extremely happy because the vast majority of requirements have been met by this. Now, we need to be very clear. This is not draft legislation as yet. What this is a discussion document, a research paper that was released, and we have not even started the legislative process. So this is still a long way off. But let's talk about the recommendations made. Number one, they extend the definition of a whistleblower to people that are not necessarily employees, but actual fact see something wrong and do that. Bullying by employees, other employees in the organization, they've included that. Very important is the onus where in the past when a whistleblower comes forward, they get victimized and they get fired, they get disciplined, they get fired. What the recommendation is that the onus resides with the employer to prove that they did not discipline and fire the person because of the whistleblower process. So it's important that the onus have now shifted from the whistleblower to the employer. The mechanisms that are now being suggested is, for example, enhancing the powers of the South African human rights to investigate and deal with protected disclosures. Another one would be to ensure, very important, that the whistleblower have access to legal processes, both before and after blowing the whistle, because what we find is that whistleblower rights are being trampled on purely because they do not understand the law, and typically when they go to a lawyer, the lawyer uses labor acts to protect them and to fight their cause, which is not necessarily true because the Protected Disclosure Act, as it is today, actual facts does not allow for an individual, an employee, to be bullied or to be victimized. What this now does is there will be a fund. Our question is, and once it comes to the drafting of legislation, we will get involved very deeply in this process because what we're worried about is that the South African human rights already are under a lot of pressure because of the work, and the legal aid board that is now being suggested we use, the limitations need to be lifted, first of all, because the legal aid board have limitations on who they can support financially, not financially in terms of legal, based on the current person's financial standing. So that needs to be looked at as well. So those are some of the few. I mean, the major one that is there is that at the moment, South Africans use witness protection and whistleblower protection interchangeably.
Yes.
And they are not the same. Witness protection only comes into play when a witness at that stage, life is in danger and the matter is enrolled in court. Now, if those two come into play, then the witness protection under the MPA, the Witness Protection Office, can then step in. What this Act proposes to do is, in actual fact, broaden that so that the whistleblower can be covered by that legislation as well. And that is a very powerful tool that will come into play.
But Mr. Martins, don't you think this is a bit too late? I mean, we saw what happened with Babita Deokaran and, of course, a number of state capture witnesses who not only suffered financial loss, as you've just mentioned, but were also victimized and even intimidated for speaking out.
Absolutely. This has taken a while, but rather dwell in the past. Let's learn the lessons. Let's work with the Department of Justice to make sure that the legislation can do what we wanted to do, what it's supposed to do, and to protect whistleblowers. We can go back and list number of names that people have lost their lives. What we need to do is to ensure that those people are taken care of, the family members that are left behind, but we need to look into the future to make sure that this never happens in South Africa. We need this legislation. Yesterday, one of our concerns, of course, is that it will take quite a while to get the legislation passed, and we are hoping that they can accelerate the process. Because if you look where we are right now, there's going to be elections. Next year, Parliament has to reset. So we are looking at it along the lines of somewhere around the end of 2024, the beginning of 2025, where this actually starts gaining pace. There's a lot of work that lies ahead of us, and we're hoping that Parliament will accelerate the process for this legislation so that we can get the protection, get the financial muscle that the whistleblowers need, and then we can move on.
And then, Mr. Martins, I wanted to ask, when we started this interview, sorry to backtrack you a little bit here, are you working as an independent body or you working in association with government?
Number one, I'm Ben Theron, not Mr. Martins.
Yes, sir.
We are working with government. We have been dealing directly with the Department of Justice as well as the Ministry to get our point across. And we would like to believe that the inputs that the end result of this research document is because civil society and other organizations have inputted tremendously. And if you look at the research document, they actually refer to people that have contributed to that. So there is a list of people that have contributed. The research, I must say, has been thorough. And what we appreciate is that they've gone international and said different companies, different countries have good practices. There are errors where fall through shortcomings where they are, but they have taken the good practices of different countries and tried to put it in. COSATU, you just quoted COSATU talking about there need to be a consideration for rewarding whistleblowers financially to a percentage of that which happens in America. And we will be talking to the Department of Justice and the Ministry around that specific option as well. Another area that is not covered at all in the recommendations is the psychological support. Now, we know that whistleblowers in South Africa are put under tremendous pressure, which then leads to psychological stress and trauma and post-traumatic stress. That's what people suffer from. And it's important that we address that as well, because it does not help you take care of everything else, but the psychological impact of that make the whistleblower suffer.
Mr. Theron, I'm so sorry. I've called you Mr. Martins twice there. I was talking to Mr. Martins earlier on. I do apologize profusely there. Now, finally, sir, look, would establishing then such a fund to support whistleblowers, you think, and envisioned by government, encourage people to come forward and report any wrongdoing, as we've seen a number of whistleblowers have either had to flee the country, beg for financial assistance, or just go underground and nobody knows where they've disappeared to?
There are a number of factors that will contribute to changing the atmosphere, the culture around whistleblowing. People are still regarded as being sellouts if they blow the whistle. One of the recommendations, of course, made was that there need to be a champion inside all companies that will champion the cause of whistleblowers. And we need to change the culture around whistleblowing, because unless we change the culture, we don't change the environment of whistleblowing. So we have to change the culture so that the organizations embrace whistleblowers. And after all, why they are doing this is they are protecting the company, if it's a company, they're protecting the state, if they're working in the state. And if you look at the period of state capture, billions were lost. And the whistleblowers were those people that stopped that corruption from continuing. So it's important that we protect it. And it's not only the rewarding, the percentage that goes there, it is the holistic picture. It is taking care of them financially, making sure they are emotionally properly protected, as well as physically, them and their families. And of course, they must understand and they must be legally protected as well. Those factors will go a long way in addressing the current situation where we are today into some place somewhere in the future where whistleblowers are absolutely celebrated as heroes and heroines.
Thank you so much to Mr. Ben Theron there of the newly launched Whistleblower House. And he was just basically talking to us about what, of course, the body is going to be doing and some of the proposals that have been made, of course, in relation to how its functions and capabilities are going to be.